Hey, it's Michelle Flood from eXp Realty. You've probably been wondering where I've been lately. Me too. But I have a minute because there's a storm brewing and my cats are freaking out. So I thought maybe I would come online because I really kind of wanted to tell you a little bit about a situation that I have some buyers that I'm taking care of or running into. And I'm having this situation because they're not buying in the state of Florida. And I just know state of Florida, see my cats are flipping, state of Florida rules on how we represent our buyers and sellers in Florida, and we're called transaction brokers. And so in some areas you can be a dual agent, and we don't allow that in the state of Florida. We used to. When I first got into the business, we had disclosure forms that we had to give to all of our buyers and sellers and let them know what kind of a relationship we were having with them. And they changed that like somewhere around 2018 or 19, I think it was. But anyway, I found this and I just kind of wanted to go over some of it with you. What is a dual agency, and can I represent both the buyer and the seller? And of course, I can. I can represent both the buyer and seller, but does that make me do does that make me become a dual agent? And like I told you before, in some states and other parts of the country, you have the option to represent the buyer, the seller, or both, and that's known as dual agency. But it's not legal in the state of Florida to do that, and it's actually a really good thing. So in Florida, it's against the law for a realtor to represent the buyer and the seller in the same transaction as a fiduciary. And that word is really important. A fiduciary duty, also known as obedience, loyalty, and confidentiality, cannot be provided to more than one party in a transaction in Florida. It can never really be provided even in other states if you think about it. So, and this is part of our code of ethics. And the code of ethics that we all adhere to is from the National Association of Realtors, not just the Florida Realtors or the Missouri Realtors. This is all, the whole country. We swear an oath to uphold these laws and to act in a with certain conduct. So if I list a property for sale and a buyer comes along and that they want to buy it and they ask me what should I offer, or the seller, what do I think the seller would accept, am I allowed to tell them? And what if the seller asks me if they should counteroffer and how much? Should I be allowed to tell them what I've been told by the buyer? Should I be allowed to tell the buyer what the seller told me? No, you can't do that. So this doesn't mean that I can't, as a real estate agent in Florida, handle the transaction for both the buyer and the seller. We have that agency relationship called the transaction broker, which is actually the default relationship. If you don't pick one, if you have those disclosures in other states. But anyway, I digress. Um, Also, there's another one called like single agency, and that's the one that you would go into, which I've never really used, and I'm not really sure much about it, but I'm going to read you a little bit about it when I get to that. In the transaction broker capacity, the realtor is working for the transaction, but has not entered into a fiduciary relationship with either party. This means I am Switzerland between the buyer and seller. However, by definition, the realtor owes both parties a limited confidentiality. So, like I said before, if I have the listing and I bring a buyer and I know what the seller will take for it, but the buyer is going to come in and offer something, if the buyer says to me, how much money, and I know what that amount is, will the seller accept in this transaction, I cannot tell the buyer what that is. And conversely, if the buyer looks at me and says, okay, I'm going to offer this much, and if the buyer doesn't accept it, I'll go to this much, I can't tell the seller that. So that's what it means with limited confidentiality. The things that I have to be really careful about in the relationship with both parties is giving the seller and the buyer a heads up about anything that will affect the value of the property. If I know that the air condition has broken 15 times in the last 5 days, the seller needs to as well. We need to disclose that to the buyer. that's something that affects the value because, $20,000 later and you're going to have a new air conditioner when you walk in if they've just got it set up where it will pass the inspection. Just like a little patchy here and there when they know they need a new roof. Those things affect the value of the property. If the house is an unreported sinkhole and I find out about that, those things all have to be disclosed to everybody. So there are legally required duties for a single agent versus a transaction broker, which is the transaction broker is what happens in Florida. So in single agency, and transaction brokers, we have to deal honestly and fairly. We only owe loyalty if we're in a single agency. And we owe limited confidentiality to both parties. Limited confidentiality as a transaction broker, but complete confidentiality if we're in single agency, meaning we're only representing one side of the transaction, even though we might bring the buyer or the seller, whatever it is. Obedience and full disclosure, single agency. But we also have, for both of those things, have to account for all funds, use skill, care, and diligence in the transaction, present all offers and counter offers in a timely manner, and like I said before, disclose all known facts that materially affect the value of residential real property and are not readily observable. Oh boy, I hope I didn't lose you guys because our power just flickered. Anyway, disclosing all known facts that materially affect the value of residential real property and are not readily observable. So this is also really important. Notice that loyalty, obedience, and full disclosure are not duties of the transaction broker. And perhaps most importantly, only limited confidentiality is owed by the transaction broker relationship. So keeping that in mind, the lack of full disclosure does not mean that the transaction broker can hide anything from you, only that they're not obligated to tell you everything, such as how much the seller will accept or how much a buyer will pay. Single agents are required to disclose that information if they have it. The transaction broker relationship disclosure form states that the following just before listing the duties above. A transaction broker provides a limited form of representation to a buyer, a seller, or both in a real estate transaction, but does not represent either in a fiduciary capacity or as a single agent. The only possible pro with a true dual agency would be that communication may be expelled because there's only one agent involved. So you only have one person that you're talking to, and so you're probably getting better information than like 50 million people that are, coming through, or two agents working together. It's one guy taking care of everything, but it's not enough to really outweigh all the potential cons. And I am happy that the state of Florida doesn't allow dual agency. It was really kind of hard, especially as a green real estate agent, to understand all those different agencies. And I always tried to opt for the transaction broker on the disclosure forms when we had them back in the day, because I did not want to get caught up in all of that other stuff. Honestly, if I would have to do stuff like that, I probably would have set myself up with a real estate attorney, wrote the offer, and then went to an attorney and let them take care of it like they do up in New York City. So anyway, I just wanted to go over that with you and let you know. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it worked out okay, because I'm getting all kinds of freaky freaking messages. Anyway, I'm Michelle Flood with eXp Realty, and I would love to help you buy or sell a home. I hope you have a good day. See ya.